Have you ever paused to wonder if the thing we call love is merely a finely crafted defense against the fear of being alone? What if our need for another is just a gilded cage, designed to shield us from the vast emptiness within? And what if the relationships we build are just elaborate ways of running from ourselves? Nothing reveals this truth more than the profound discomfort we feel in our own silence. The Stoics urged us to perform a chilling meditation. Imagine yourself on your deathbed. The room is still, the air is heavy, and the entire weight of your existence presses down on you. In that final clarifying moment, ask yourself, did I live my own life, or did I merely exist in the shadow of another's? They warned us against willingly surrendering our inner freedom, knowing that the chains we choose for ourselves are the hardest to break. We adorn these chains with romance. We call them companionship. We mistake them for completion. But deep down, a quiet fire burns. A voice whispers that you were meant for more than this. If you've ever felt that whisper, then this conversation is for you. And if you seek the courage to face yourself without a mask, to build a life from your own sovereign strength, then consider this an invitation to become the person who refuses to abandon their own soul. Most people don't fall in love from a place of wholeness. They fall into it to escape the deafening silence that awaits when all the noise fades, the kind of silence that forces you to hear your own thoughts, to confront the questions you've been avoiding for years. There is an empty space in their life, a void that feels too wide, too echoing, too raw. So they fill it with another person, not because they desire that specific soul, but because it is easier than furnishing that space themselves. We rarely speak of this, but much of what we call love is simply avoidance in a beautiful disguise. It is far easier to lose yourself in someone else's stories, their emotions, and their needs, than to confront your own. As Carl Jung wrote, loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you. For so many, a relationship is not a bridge to true connection. It is a shield from that very loneliness, a way to pretend they are understood, even when they have never truly understood themselves. The problem is, when love is rooted in fear, it becomes a fragile, glass-like thing. Every disagreement feels like a threat to its existence. Every moment of distance feels like a crack spreading across its surface. The relationship is burdened with an impossible task, to hold together not just two lives, but all the unresolved parts of each person. And when those cracks inevitably appear, panic sets in. People cling harder. They negotiate away their values, silence their own desires, and bend themselves into shapes that don't fit, all to keep the other person from walking away. At that point, it's no longer love. It's a survival tactic, a desperate attempt to keep from being left alone with the very silence they've spent a lifetime running from. This is why so many people disappear inside their relationships without even realizing it. The process is subtle, almost invisible. It starts with small compromises: where to eat, what to watch, how to spend a weekend. It feels like partnership, but then the compromises grow larger. You hold back parts of yourself you know they won't understand. You abandon dreams because they might create tension. You begin to sand down your own personality, not because you are growing, but because you fear your true, unedited self might cost you the relationship. Over time, the person you once were becomes harder to recognize, even to yourself. Marcus Aurelius reminded us, it is not death that a man should fear, but he should fear never beginning to live. And that is the quiet tragedy here. So many people stop truly living the moment they become afraid of losing someone. When the foundation of love is fear, it denies you the very thing true connection is meant to bring: freedom. A healthy love should allow you to stand taller, not shrink smaller. It should amplify your individuality, not erase it. But when fear is in control, love becomes a contract of unspoken conditions. Don't be too much. Don't change too fast. Don't disturb the balance, even if that balance is slowly suffocating you. The great irony is that the silence we run from is not an enemy. It is an oracle. In solitude, the noise of the world fades, and you begin to hear your own voice again. At first, it's uncomfortable. You hear the echoes of doubt, fear, and regret. But if you stay with it, if you learn to sit in that quiet space, you also begin to hear your values, your calling, your unshakable truth. As Jung said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And you cannot do that if you are constantly drowning in someone else's presence, if your every thought is shaped not to find your own center, but merely to keep the peace. The fear is rarely about losing the other person. It is about losing the buffer they provide between you and yourself. When you remove that distraction, you are left with the one person you can't escape. For many, that is the most terrifying encounter of all. But it is also the encounter that changes everything. Because once you can sit in your own silence without needing to flee, you stop depending on others to make you feel whole. You stop negotiating your identity for the sake of belonging. You begin to love by choice, not by necessity. And that is a love that cannot be broken by absence or distance, because it is built not on fear, but on freedom. From our earliest moments, we are handed a script. It's woven into bedtime stories, broadcast in films, and embedded in the way adults talk about life. The story goes like this. You grow up, you find someone, you fall in love, and you settle down. It is painted as the ultimate destination, the final chapter where all loose ends are tied. Few ever question what happens after the scene fades to black. Fewer still ask if this script serves us, or if it quietly robs us of the chance to meet the most important person we will ever know, ourselves. This conditioning doesn't arrive as a command. It is a subtle, insidious whisper. It lives in the casual questions from relatives. When are you going to meet someone? As if your life is merely a waiting room for love. By the time we are adults, the message is an unquestioned truth, as fundamental as gravity. Life without a partner, we are taught to believe, is an incomplete life, and so many enter relationships not from a place of self-knowledge, but from a sense of duty to a story they never wrote. As Jung observed, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. A relationship can become a way to avoid that terrifying work. If someone else validates us, we don't have to fully validate ourselves. This invisible conditioning shapes not only who we choose, but how we behave. If you've been taught that your worth is tied to being partnered, you will endure things that harm you just to avoid returning to the dreaded state of being single. You will ignore red flags and tolerate disrespect, contorting yourself into someone else's ideal rather than risk the perceived failure of being alone. The crushing, unspoken equation is alone equals failure, together equals success. And this false logic keeps countless people trapped. The danger of living by this cultural blueprint is that it discourages deep self-exploration. If the destination is already set, why wander off the path? The conditioning tells you that discovering yourself is secondary to finding someone else. And so, you might suppress ambitions, interests, or ideas because they could make it harder to fit the mold. In this way, the story doesn't just shape your relationships, it shapes your very identity. The journey to become your true self, what Jung called individuation, demands time, space, and a willingness to stand apart. But the script demands you merge, pair off, and bind your life to another's as quickly as possible. Individuation asks you to turn inward. The script commands you look outward. The first step in loosening the grip of this conditioning is to see the story for what it is. A story, not a law. When you realize you are free to write your own script, the frantic urgency to find someone fades. You begin to see the space of being single not as an absence, but as a rare opportunity, an open field where you can plant the parts of yourself that would never grow in the crowded soil of living for someone else's approval. Breaking free doesn't mean rejecting love. It means refusing to let the fear of being alone dictate the course of your life. It means choosing to know yourself deeply before you choose to share yourself. Because when you finally meet someone from a place of wholeness, you are not seeking a missing piece. You are inviting them to walk beside you on a path you have already carved for yourself. And that is the kind of connection no conditioning can manufacture. It is born from freedom, not from fear. The slow disappearance of the self. It doesn't happen in a single dramatic moment. It is a quiet fade, a series of tiny surrenders. It starts with a small compromise. You skip something you wanted to do. You soften an opinion to avoid friction. You tell yourself this is what maturity looks like, that love means meeting in the middle. At first, it feels harmless, even noble. But over time, those small concessions stack up, and the person you were begins to fade. Not because anyone demanded it, but because you offered yourself up, piece by piece. You adapt to make things smoother, to keep the peace, to protect a bond you believe you cannot live without. And while compromise is a part of any connection, there is a vast difference between adapting and erasing. When you start filtering your thoughts before you speak, when you swallow your desires because they might cause discomfort, you begin to trade authenticity for security. The Stoics warned against this. Seneca wrote, "He who is brave is free." But when love becomes a stage where you are always rehearsing the right lines, freedom slips quietly out the back door. This erosion is hard to detect because we often frame it as growth. You tell yourself you're becoming less selfish, more flexible, but there is a fine line between growing and shrinking. You start to notice small things. You laugh less in the way you used to. Your interests narrow. You hesitate before expressing what's truly on your mind. Together, these create a quiet erosion of the self, a version of you that has been carefully sanded down to fit the shape of someone else's comfort. And what makes it so dangerous is that it is self-inflicted. It's the unspoken belief that love is maintained by removing your sharp edges. Over months or years, the person in the mirror feels familiar but distant. The outline is there, but the inner fire has dimmed. The painful truth is that this disappearance doesn't strengthen a bond. It weakens it. A relationship built on partial truths creates a fragile foundation. You may keep the peace on the surface, but underneath, the connection becomes less about genuine closeness and more about maintaining an image. Reclaiming yourself is not about refusing to compromise. It's about remembering that the truest love thrives when both people stand whole. It is about recognizing that you can be kind without erasing your boundaries and loving without silencing your truth. A relationship that cannot withstand your authenticity is not a vessel that can truly hold you. The slow disappearance is seductive because it feels safe, but that safety is an illusion if it comes at the cost of your own life force. Love that demands your absence is not love. It is a contract for self-abandonment. And when you finally see this, you understand that the greatest gift you can give any relationship is the fullness of who you are, unshaped by fear and uncut by compromise. Because the moment you stop disappearing, you start living your life as it was meant to be lived. Whole, present, and unmistakably yours. The line between healthy compromise and self-erasure is a fragile one, and the desire to belong has a way of coaxing you across it without you ever noticing. One day, you realize you no longer say what you truly think unless you're certain it is safe. You've quietly abandoned certain dreams because they don't align with the shared plan. You've become careful, measured, and less spontaneous. Not because you wanted to change, but because the real you threatened the approval you had worked so hard to secure. The cost of belonging isn't always paid in dramatic moments of betrayal. More often, it is a debt paid in small, almost invisible installments. The joke you didn't make because you weren't sure how it would land. The truth you didn't speak because it might cause a ripple of conflict. The risk you didn't take because it would require explaining yourself to someone who wouldn't understand. Each of these seems minor in isolation, but together they weave a pattern of self-abandonment. Over time, you begin to live not for your own clarity, but for the stability of the group. You trade pieces of your soul for a sense of security, believing that the more you give away, the more you will belong. But if your thoughts are constantly adjusted to meet the expectations of others, your spirit will inevitably lose its own distinct color. To choose solitude when needed is to keep ownership of your own mind. It is not about isolation, it is about sovereignty. It is the profound knowing that every decision you make comes from your own center, not from a calculation of how it will be received. This isn't to say that connection is dangerous. Love, friendship, and community can be powerful sources of growth, but they only serve you if they allow for your full presence. When belonging requires constant self-editing, it is not connection. It is a subtle form of control. And control, no matter how softly applied, will always limit your capacity to live as yourself. Jung believed that individuation, the process of becoming whole, is impossible when your sense of self depends on the approval of others. You cannot integrate the parts of you that you've hidden away to maintain the peace. To choose yourself over the comfort of belonging is not easy. It can mean standing apart, breaking unspoken rules, or letting go of relationships that cannot hold your truth. It can mean moments of loneliness that feel sharper than you expected. But it also means living without the weight of constant adjustment, without the slow erosion of your own voice. And in that freedom, something remarkable happens. You begin to belong to yourself in a way no one can ever take away. Staying single doesn't mean you reject love. It means you refuse to trade your essence for it. It means that when you do choose to belong, it will be on your terms, as your whole self, without ever shrinking to fit. When you strip away the constant hum of other people's voices, something unexpected rises in its place. At first, it's unsettling, a quiet so profound it feels almost loud. You begin to notice thoughts you didn't realize were there, ideas buried under conversations, obligations, and the steady pull of another's presence. Alone, there is nowhere to hide from them. They surface with an intensity that can feel like a room you've avoided for years, suddenly lit by a harsh, revealing light. As Carl Jung wrote, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." Solitude forces that awakening. It asks you to look directly at what you've been avoiding. And while it feels like discomfort at first, buried within it is the seed of clarity. As the days pass, that clarity deepens. You begin to hear your own voice with new precision. Without the need to constantly negotiate your thoughts, your ideas stretch further, growing bolder. The world inside you begins to expand, filling with details you couldn't see when you were too busy adapting to someone else's rhythm. This is the part rarely spoken of when people discuss being alone, the way your mind sharpens when there is nothing to dilute it. What may have once felt like absence, you realize, was misunderstood all along. What you've actually been given is space. Pure, unclaimed, unmeasured space. And space has a way of revealing the truth. Marcus Aurelius said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." In solitude, that truth becomes undeniable. You stop outsourcing your validation. It begins to grow from the inside out. The more time you spend in this space, the more it changes you. Slowly, you learn to let the silence be. You discover that the discomfort you feel in stillness is simply the process of meeting yourself again. It's in that stillness that your desires become sharp. You realize which dreams are truly yours and which were inherited from someone else's vision for your life. This is when solitude begins to shift from a burden to a sanctuary, not because you wish to avoid people, but because you have tasted the freedom of living without compromise. There's a peculiar energy that comes from being alone on your own terms. It is not isolation born of rejection, but a deliberate choice rooted in self-respect. You begin to notice how much of your life was built around reacting to someone else's mood, their needs, their plans. Now, that energy is yours to direct toward creation. In this space, time itself feels different. There is an openness that allows for deeper thought. You can follow an idea to its end without being interrupted, without having to explain yourself. It's in these moments you realize how much energy was spent simply maintaining the balance of a shared life. That energy is now yours to invest where it matters most. Eventually, the space that solitude creates stops feeling like a void and starts feeling like home. You understand that the truest connections you will ever have are richer when they grow from this foundation of self. You no longer fear being alone because you have seen what can be built there. And once you have experienced that sharpness of thought, that clarity of vision, you will protect that space fiercely, not as a wall against the world, but as the ground on which you stand, steady and unshakable. From the earliest stories we are told, there runs a common thread, the promise that somewhere out there exists another person who will complete us. We see it in fairy tales, hear it in songs. You are not whole, the story goes, until you find your other half. At first, this idea feels romantic, but beneath its comforting surface lies a dangerous belief that on your own you are incomplete. And when you accept that belief, you begin to live as though your worth depends on someone else. This myth quietly shapes your decisions. Every choice is weighed against the hope of attracting or keeping another person. You might adjust your ambitions so they don't seem threatening or downplay parts of your personality that don't fit the image of a perfect partner. Over time, your identity becomes less about what feels true to you and more about what will secure a connection. This is not love, it is dependence disguised as devotion. Dependence is seductive because it offers a false sense of security. But that safety comes at a cost. You begin to measure yourself not by your own standards, but by how well you fit into someone else's life. You ignore the quiet signals from within, the dissatisfaction, the suppressed dreams, because pursuing them might disrupt the bond. As Epictetus wrote, "If you want to be free, then wish for nothing that depends on others." Freedom cannot grow in the soil of dependence. The truth is, you were never half of anything. You were always an entire person, capable of love and purpose, with or without another. The wholeness you seek from someone else can only ever be built from within. Breaking free from this myth doesn't mean rejecting relationships. It means approaching them from a place of self-sufficiency rather than need. When you no longer see yourself as a fragment waiting to be completed, love becomes a choice, not a lifeline. You can give without fear of losing yourself. This kind of love is richer because it is built between two whole people, each capable of standing on their own. The challenge is that choosing wholeness can feel lonely at first. But once you begin to build a life that feels complete on its own terms, the fear of being alone begins to fade. Your self-worth no longer swings with the moods of others. The relationships you form are not there to fill a void. They are there to share an abundance. You are not half of anything. You are a whole, complex, and capable being. And the more you live from that truth, the less you will tolerate connections that require you to shrink. Society has a way of making its preferences clear. Milestones like marriage and buying a house are celebrated as markers of a successful life. They make you predictable, and predictability is comforting to the collective. When you are part of a couple, people feel they know what comes next. Your life has a familiar shape. But step outside that pattern, live fully and unapologetically single, and suddenly you become harder to define. Your next move isn't obvious, and that unpredictability makes people uneasy. It signals a freedom that cannot be easily managed. The herd thrives on stability. It wants to know what to expect from you, and in return, it offers the safety of acceptance. But that acceptance comes with an unspoken agreement. Don't stray too far from the path. A thriving single person doesn't just hear their own rhythm, they live by it. They make choices that don't require consensus, and in a world built on conformity, that is a kind of power that both fascinates and threatens. This power is rooted in autonomy. If no one can predict your next step, it means no one else is setting your direction. The herd may see this as instability, but for the outlier, it is freedom. Of course, the herd often tries to pull the outlier back in with questions disguised as concern. Aren't you afraid of ending up alone? But these are the questions of those who measure a life by how well it mirrors the majority. They cannot see that solitude, when chosen, is not a lack, but a luxury, an open space where self-determination can flourish. What unsettles people most about the thriving single person is not their solitude, but their contentment within it. If you are alone and miserable, the herd feels validated. But when you are alone and thriving, you disrupt the narrative. You show that fulfillment is not exclusive to the couple's lane, and that makes others question the compromises they've made. In the end, the difference between the herd and the outlier is not about relationships, but about agency. The thriving single person understands that unpredictability is not chaos. It is potential. They are not rejecting connection. They are rejecting the idea that connection must come at the cost of individuality. And in a world that rewards predictability, their refusal to be easily defined is both a rebellion and a declaration. I belong to myself first. The greatest ideas rarely arrive when you are surrounded by noise. They emerge in the still hours, when the world feels distant and your attention is your own. There is a certain electricity in those moments, the long nights when you are lost in a thought, the quiet mornings when you wake with no obligation but to your own mind. In solitude, your mind roams without needing permission. As Carl Jung said, solitude is for me a fount of healing which makes my life worth living. What he understood is that creation requires space. Without it, the raw material of thought cannot take shape. When you are alone, you can chase an idea without having to justify why it matters. You can follow a thought into the depths of obsession, allowing it to consume you for hours or days. There is no one to tell you to slow down, and no one's logic to answer to but your own. The freedom to immerse yourself completely in your own process is a rare gift in a world obsessed with constant connection. It is in that very freedom that the creative edge is sharpened. Without compromise, without the subtle pressure to adjust your pace for another, the mind learns to stretch in ways that are impossible in a crowd. Crowded spaces, be they physical or emotional, inevitably pull your attention outward. You become aware of others, of how your actions might be interpreted, of what is expected of you. While that awareness is useful in collaboration, it is poison to a certain kind of thought, the kind that must be unruly, unmeasured, and untouched by outside influence to truly flourish. Solitude removes the need for approval. You are no longer creating to be seen in a certain way. You are creating because something within you demands to be brought into existence. As Seneca noted, we must take a break from the world and withdraw into ourselves. This is not a withdrawal born of avoidance. It is withdrawal as an act of preservation, a way to protect the fragile beginnings of an idea until it is strong enough to face the world. The absence of expectation is what makes solitude such fertile ground. When no one is waiting for you to produce a certain kind of work, you are free to explore the strange, the impractical, even the absurd. It is often in those directions that the most original ideas reside. You can write something that may never be published, sketch an image no one else will see, experiment without the fear of public failure. In this way, solitude becomes a laboratory for the imagination, a sanctuary where mistakes are not only permitted, but essential. Without the constant lens of another's opinion, you can take risks that would otherwise feel far too exposed. There is also a rhythm to solitude that nurtures creativity. Free from the interruptions of a shared life, you can more easily enter what psychologists call a state of flow, where time seems to dissolve and you become so absorbed in the work that nothing else exists. You don't have to stop mid-thought to answer a message or explain why you are still at your desk. Momentum builds, carrying you deeper into the process. And what emerges from that state is often something you could never have achieved through sheer force of will. It was Marcus Aurelius who wrote, "Nowhere you can go is more peaceful, more free of interruptions than your own soul." And in that uninterrupted space, your best work often finds you. The creative edge found in solitude is not merely about producing more, it is about producing work that feels truer. In the absence of others, you stop mimicking. You stop unconsciously shaping your ideas to match what is popular or what will be praised. You stop editing before you have even begun. What emerges is raw, unfiltered, and entirely yours. Even if it is imperfect, it carries your signature in a way that work made under constant influence never can. That authenticity is worth more than polish, for it is the foundation of a voice that cannot be replicated. This is why so many great thinkers, writers, and artists have sought solitude, not as a rejection of people, but as a necessary ingredient for their work. They understood that while collaboration has its place, the deepest, most transformative insights are often born in the quiet hours that no one else sees. Alone, you can wrestle with your own contradictions, push against your own limits, and listen for the truths that do not speak loudly enough to be heard in a crowd. Those truths might be unsettling at first, but they are the ones that tend to reshape everything you create thereafter. In the end, the creative edge of being alone comes down to this. Solitude gives you the room to hear yourself clearly, without interruption, without dilution. It allows you to build something before the world has a chance to tell you what it ought to be. And once you have experienced that kind of space, once you have felt what it is like to create without compromise, you begin to guard it fiercely. Not because you want to shut the world out, but because you have seen how much more alive your work, your ideas, and your very self become when you give them the gift of being born in silence. When you step away from the constant emotional exchange that defines a close bond, something subtle yet powerful begins to shift. At first, it can be disorienting. You may be used to checking the emotional temperature of another before you've even taken your own, conditioned to adjust your tone, your energy, your words to maintain a delicate balance or avoid conflict. But when you remove yourself from that constant negotiation, the static begins to clear. You begin to realize just how much of what you have been feeling was never truly yours to begin with. It is not that other people intend to weigh you down. It is simply what happens when you are deeply connected. Their highs become your highs. Their lows seep into your bones. Over time, it becomes harder to tell where you end and they begin. But in solitude, you start to notice the difference. You realize the irritation you've been carrying is not a permanent part of you. It is the residue of constantly managing another's frustrations. The heaviness that once lingered in your chest does not belong to you at all. It is something you absorbed while trying to keep the peace. The Stoics taught that our peace of mind depends not on events, but on the judgments we attach to them. When you are alone, those judgments are finally your own, unfiltered by someone else's lens. At first, this clarity can feel almost too sharp. You are not accustomed to sitting with an emotion without immediately explaining or justifying it to someone else. There is no one to reassure you that you are overthinking, no one to distract you with their own crisis. You are left to feel what you feel in its entirety. And in that full, unmediated experience, you start to hear yourself again. You notice what actually excites you, not what you have been pretending to enjoy to match another's mood. You identify what truly irritates you, not just what has been a convenient point of contention. Slowly, your emotional landscape ceases to be a shared space and becomes your own territory. This is where the detox truly begins. Freed from the constant influx of another person's needs, moods, and unspoken expectations, your very nervous system begins to settle. You stop waking up braced for emotional surprises. You stop rehearsing conversations in your head. You start moving through your day without the weight of invisible negotiations. Should I say this? Will this upset them? Do I need to fix this before it becomes a problem? The space this leaves behind is not empty. It is breathable. It is filled with your own rhythm, your own pace, your own sense of balance. Emotional independence does not mean you stop caring for others. It means you stop carrying them in ways that cost you yourself. In solitude, you learn to articulate these things to yourself first. You learn to validate your own emotions without waiting for external acknowledgement. You give yourself permission to feel, without the need to edit for another's comfort. And when you do re-enter a connection, you do so from a place of groundedness, not entanglement. One of the most surprising parts of this process is the way joy changes. When you are constantly linked to another person's emotional state, your joy is never entirely your own. It is either amplified by their happiness or dampened by their sorrow. Alone, your joy becomes self-generated, steady, and less vulnerable to the pull of someone else's storm. You start to notice the small, pure pleasures that were once just background noise. The way the light hits your kitchen in the morning, the sound of your own laughter at something only you find funny, the calm that comes from simply being in your own space. This emotional detox is not always comfortable. There will be moments when the absence of another's emotional presence feels like a kind of void. You might even feel the pull to seek out that old entanglement just to feel something familiar. But if you can resist the urge to fill the silence too quickly, you will discover that the void was never a void at all. It was simply space, waiting to be reclaimed by you. Space where your own voice, long overshadowed, can finally begin to speak again. In the end, the emotional detox that comes from solitude is less about removing others from your life and more about removing the haze they unintentionally create around your inner world. It is about finally standing in the center of your own emotional weather without being swept away by someone else's storm. And once you have felt that kind of clarity, once you have experienced the quiet strength that comes from owning every feeling that passes through you, you understand why protecting it becomes non-negotiable. Because in that clarity, you do not just hear yourself again. You recognize yourself. And that recognition is the beginning of everything. Choose to live on your own terms, without the scaffolding of a partner or the validation of a group, and the labels will find you swiftly. Lonely, selfish, incomplete. These words are rarely about you. They are about the discomfort your independence stirs in others. You have stepped outside the script, and people do not quite know what to do with that. Our social systems favor dependence because it is predictable. A dependent person is easier to guide, to sell to keep in place. If your sense of self is derived from a partner's approval or your role within a group, you will go to great lengths to protect it, even at the cost of your own truth. Dependence keeps you in line, but it also keeps the system safe. When you no longer need that structure to feel whole, you cannot be controlled in the same way. Your decisions are not dictated by a fear of being left out, abandoned, or judged. This makes you unpredictable, something the system cannot easily handle. It is no surprise, then, that independence is so often mislabeled. They call it loneliness because they cannot imagine fulfillment without constant company. They call it selfishness because you prioritize your own path over the comfort of conformity. They call it incomplete because their idea of completion is built upon the presence of another. This mislabeling is a subtle form of social control. If independence is painted as something undesirable, fewer people will pursue it. If being single is framed as a failure, people will rush to couple up, even if it means silencing parts of themselves to fit the mold. The system does not need to chain you physically. It only needs to shape your beliefs about what makes a life meaningful. That is why the choice to live freely, truly freely, is so radical. It is not just about you. It is a refusal to reinforce a cycle that trades authenticity for acceptance. True independence is threatening because it serves as living proof that one can exist and thrive without constant validation. You do not need someone else to tell you who you are, to legitimize your choices, or to keep you from feeling empty. This is not a rejection of love or connection. It is the removal of need from the equation. Love given freely, without dependence, is one of its purest forms. But to reach that point, you must be able to stand firmly on your own. And yet, this kind of freedom is not easy to hold. It carries its own challenges. There will be days when the weight of being fully responsible for your own life feels heavier than you expected. No one else is there to take the blame when you fall, and no one else gets the credit when you succeed. You own it all. But that is the point. Freedom without ownership is not real freedom. It is just another form of dependence disguised as choice. The uncomfortable truth is that people often fear what they secretly desire. Those who criticize your independence often wish they had the courage to claim their own. They might not admit it, even to themselves, but your example forces them to confront the compromises they have made. It is easier to dismiss you than to question whether they have settled for something smaller than what they truly wanted. So, when they call you lonely, remember that solitude can be a wellspring of power. When they call you selfish, remember that self-respect is the bedrock of every meaningful connection you will ever have. And when they call you incomplete, remember that wholeness is not found in what you add to your life, but in what you refuse to give away. The system may thrive on dependence, but your life does not have to. The mislabeling will fade in importance once you see it for what it is, a sign that you have stepped beyond the boundaries where others feel safest. And once you have stepped out, you will realize there is far more space out here than you were ever led to believe. Sovereignty is not a state you simply stumble into. It is earned, and the price is never cheap. Claiming it requires letting go of the very things most people cling to as proof of a good life. The shared plans that lend a sense of direction. The automatic affection that offers reassurance without effort. The built-in companionship that softens the edges of weekends and holidays. These are warm, comforting things, but they come with strings attached. Strings that can quietly pull you away from your own center. To step into true sovereignty means cutting some of those strings, a decision most will never make, because it demands giving up a comfort that feels too good to lose. In solitude, there is no one to validate or veto your decisions. Every choice is yours alone. That freedom can feel intoxicating and terrifying all at once. There is no one to share the weight when a decision turns out wrong, no one with whom to split the blame. But there is also no one to hold you back when your instincts are sharp and your vision is clear. Sovereignty is about owning both outcomes, the victories and the mistakes, with the same steady acceptance. You stop outsourcing responsibility for your life and begin to carry it entirely yourself. The Stoics understood this profoundly. As Epictetus wrote, "No man is free who is not master of himself." Solitude becomes the training ground for this very mastery. Of course, the price you pay is not only in tangible comforts. You pay in moments of doubt, in nights when the silence feels heavier than you thought it could, in mornings when you wish there were someone beside you to share a small joy. Sovereignty can indeed be lonely, not from a lack of people, but from the deliberate choice to live without depending on them to keep you steady. You learn to be your own anchor, to generate your own reassurance, to sit with discomfort instead of reaching for the quick fix of another's presence. That skill, learning to hold your ground in the absence of external support, becomes one of your greatest strengths. The beauty of sovereignty is how it changes the quality of every connection you do choose to have. Without dependence, relationships are no longer about filling a void. They become choices made from a place of abundance, not necessity. You are not asking someone to complete you or rescue you from yourself. You are inviting them to walk beside you because you want to, not because you have to. Jung often spoke of individuation, the process of becoming whole within oneself. Sovereignty is the lived expression of that wholeness. It means you can love deeply, without the fear that losing someone will cause you to lose yourself. But the world rarely encourages this kind of self-rule. It thrives on mutual reliance, on the predictability of people bound to each other in ways that keep them in place. A sovereign individual cannot be so easily managed or persuaded. You are less likely to accept what does not align with your values, less willing to remain in situations that do not serve your growth. This can make you harder to be around for those who prefer comfort over truth. You may find that some relationships fade because they were built on your willingness to compromise pieces of yourself to keep the peace. Sovereignty does not allow for that kind of self-erasure. The price also includes the necessity of confronting yourself without distraction. There is no one to blame when you fail to act, no one to hide behind when you avoid the hard work. You see yourself clearly, your flaws, your blind spots, your excuses. And in that clarity, you have two choices: change or accept the truth of who you are without running from it. Both are difficult, but either is a step toward the kind of freedom most people only ever talk about. The reward for paying this price is a life that is finally and unmistakably your own. Every decision, every achievement, every mistake carries your signature. You move through the world without needing to dilute yourself for acceptance or bend yourself into a shape that fits someone else's plans. Your time is yours. Your energy is yours. Your mind is yours. That does not mean life becomes easier. It means it becomes yours, in a way that nothing and no one can take from you. And once you have felt that, once you have lived knowing you are the sole author of your choices, it becomes almost impossible to give it up. The comfort of shared plans and automatic affection will always have their pull, but they will never outweigh the quiet, unyielding power of knowing that you belong completely to yourself. That is the price of sovereignty, and that is why it is always worth paying. There comes a point in solitude where something shifts. At first, being alone can feel like an empty space you are compelled to fill, a room too quiet, a life missing a sound to which you've grown accustomed. You might catch yourself glancing at your phone, not because you have something to say, but because you are hoping someone will remind you that you matter. In the beginning, solitude tests you. It shows you every crack, every place you have relied on someone else to hold you together. But if you stay with it long enough, if you resist the urge to rush back into the comfort of being needed or validated, something remarkable happens. The silence stops feeling like a punishment and starts to feel like a kind of strength you did not know you possessed. It is not a sudden transformation. It is gradual, almost unnoticeable at first. You wake up one morning and realize you do not feel the same pull to check in with someone before making a decision. You do not need another to reassure you when doubt creeps in. You have learned to steady yourself. That is the quiet power of independence. It is not loud or boastful, but it is unshakable. You have stopped outsourcing your stability, and in doing so, you have taken back a kind of freedom most people never truly know. The Stoics understood this well. Epictetus taught that freedom comes not from the world, but from mastering your own mind and desires, from no longer depending on things outside of yourself for peace. There is a deep calm that comes with knowing you can handle what life brings without leaning on another's emotional scaffolding. You have been through the moments of doubt, the long nights when you questioned if you were strong enough to stand alone, and you have emerged on the other side, not untouched, but unbroken. You no longer fear the quiet because you have learned to hear your own voice within it. And that voice has become louder, clearer, and more trustworthy than all the noise of outside opinions. What is remarkable is how this changes your relationships, not by pushing people away, but by redefining why they are in your life. When you are no longer seeking someone to complete you, you begin choosing people who expand you. Love, friendship, connection, these things cease to be about filling a void and start to be about sharing an abundance. It was Jung who believed that true connection could only exist between two whole individuals, each one responsible for their own journey of growth. When you have truly met yourself, you can at last meet others, not from a place of quiet need, but from a place of wholeness. This newfound solidity is not an armor against life. Vulnerability remains. You will still know the sting of pain, the shadow of disappointment, the echo of longing. But these feelings will no longer have the power to unmoor you. The fear of loss recedes, for you understand that even in losing something precious, you will never again lose yourself. You have walked through solitude and emerged not broken, but whole. You have sat in the silence and discovered not an echoing void, but a vibrant inner landscape, a world that only you could cultivate. To carry this knowing within you is to change the very way you walk through the world. And with this strength comes a profound humility. You see that self-reliance is not the same as isolation. It is the freedom to accept a helping hand without feeling diminished, to love deeply without the fear of losing your balance. People may come and go, seasons may change, but your foundation remains unshaken, for it is built not on the shifting sands of their presence, but on the bedrock of your own being. Herein lies the great paradox of freedom. The more deeply you belong to yourself, the more completely and generously you can give yourself to others. Perhaps the most profound transformation is in your perception of time itself. The frantic rush to fill every moment, to outrun the silence of your own thoughts, simply dissolves. You begin to savor time, to inhabit it fully, because you are no longer trying to escape. The ordinary becomes sacred, a walk at dusk, a meal in silence, an evening lost in a book. These are no longer mere placeholders between grand events. You realize, with startling clarity, that this is life itself. When you finally come face to face with this version of yourself, you understand a fundamental truth. You were never broken. You were simply obscured, hidden beneath the noise of the world, the pull of distraction, and the weight of dependence. Now, having stripped those layers away, you see what was always there, a self that is whole, constant, and vibrantly alive. This is the moment you become unshakable. And once you have felt this deep, internal stillness, there is no returning to a life where your peace is a fragile thing held in the hands of another. The self you have finally met is not a delicate treasure to be guarded. It is the very ground you stand on, the strongest foundation you will ever know. In the end, the greatest freedom is not something you achieve, but something you realize, the quiet, certain knowledge that you are already whole. Protect this truth. Live from it. And never allow the noise of the world to convince you otherwise. If these words resonated with you, your journey into this strength and self-discovery can continue. There is another reflection waiting for you on your screen. We invite you to explore it next. Thank you for being a part of Stoic Journal, where every step is a return to who you were always meant to be.